Christian, even being a Catholic today in the West where I live, comes with some mild persecution. You can lose your job, you can be insulted, you can be left out. But the persecution of the early church was fierce. We're going to look at the 10 persecutions of the church under the Roman Empire. Scholars number 10, beginning with Nero and ending with Diocletian. Let's take a look at those 10 real quick before we begin. The first persecution was the persecution under Nero. It took place beginning in maybe 54, but really got started in around the year 65 and went to about 68. This is the persecution that took the lives of St. Peter, St. Paul, all the apostles during this time period except for John. The second persecution of the church occurred under Domitian. This happened in the 90s. This is a time period, according to tradition, in which the church was persecuted, and John, the apostle, was sent into exile, where he received the vision or recorded the vision of the apocalypse. The third persecution happened under Trajan. That's from 98 to 117. The fourth one is the persecution under Marcus Aurelius, which is 161 to 180. Many people will refer to Marcus Aurelius as the, quote, good emperor. However, he did persecute Christians. The fifth persecution happened under Septimius Severus. That was 193 to 211. Then the persecution under Maximinus, that was 235 to 238. The persecution of Decius, 249 to 251. We talked about that persecution in the context of our video lesson on St. Cyprian of Carthage. Then there was the persecution under Valerian, the persecution under Aurelian, which is 270 to 275, and that brings us to the final persecution, which was the worst, and that is Diocletian. Probably the first one under Nero and then the last one under Diocletian were the most violent and took the most lives. Probably many of the saints who are martyrs that you know in your private devotion or from your own readings come from the period of Diocletian. For example, Saint Sebastian, Saint Agnes of Rome, Saint Marcellinus and Peter, a pope, Saint Gaius, Saint Chrysogonus, Saint George, the famous martyr who you've probably seen in the context of an icon of him slaying a dragon. We're going to dedicate an entire NSTI lesson to the martyrdom, the historical martyrdom of St. George, and then do an analysis of that icon and its allegories. Also, St. Anastasia, her name appears in the Roman canon, and St. Philomena. These are just a sampling of the thousands of saints who gave up their lives, gave up everything for Jesus Christ. The persecution began in its most severe stage in the year 299. In that year, the Roman Haruspex, which is like a diviner, reported to the emperors that he couldn't do his divination. He couldn't see into the future and help the emperor because remember, the emperors need all kinds of inside information from these diviners as they fight wars. They want to know, can I win this? Should I enter this war or not? And they rely on these diviners. And the diviner says that he can no longer predict or see the future because of the presence of Christians. It was even rumored that there were Christians making the sign of the cross in court during these sacrifices and during these sessions of divination, and that this was somehow binding the haruspex and the diviners from seeing the future. So this alarms the emperor. Never in the history of Rome have the seers been prohibited by the acts of a certain populace. In this case, it's the Christians. So a couple years later, Diocletian and Galerius send two delegates to the oracle of Apollo and ask, what's going on? Why are the gods falling silent? And the answer is, it's because of the pious. It's because of the just upon the earth that the gods are falling silent. And they interpreted that to mean the Christians. And a little bit off topic, but if you've ever read my novel, Sword and Serpent, the opening pages begin with that scene of the emperors being confused that they can no longer get answers from the gods because the presence of Christians in their midst. So let's look at what Diocletian did next. There were actually 4 edicts, and they progressively get worse as time goes on. The first edict was on February 23rd, 303. At this time, the Church of Nicomedia, which is where the capital in the Eastern Empire is, was destroyed. It also ordered the destruction of all Christian scriptures, liturgical books, and places of worship. It prohibited Christians from assembling for worship. Christians also lost the right to petition the court. It's almost like losing your citizenship. All emancipated Christians who had been enslaved were now de facto re-enslaved. And all Christians, senators, equestrians, decurions, and soldiers were discharged and lost their rank. So this happens in February of 303. The second edict comes a few months later. This is in the summer of 303. All Christian clergy were to be imprisoned. All bishops, all priests and deacons, and yes, even the lectors, even the readers, were thrown into prison. Eusebius records that the edict imprisoned so many priests that ordinary criminals had to be released to make room for all the clergy being arrested. The third edict happened later in that year, 303, on November 20th. Much to the disappointment of Diocletian, the Christians were emboldened by the persecution. They saw their bishops, they saw their priests going to prison and suffering for Christ. And guess what this did for the lay people? It strengthened their faith. They became even more zealous for Christ. So Diocletian realized he needed to do something that would dishearten the Christian lay people. What did he do? He ordered that all Christian clergy, bishops, priests, deacons, lectors, everybody, were required to offer sacrifice in order to be released from prison. That is, deny Jesus Christ and show their allegiance to the pagan gods and to the pagan emperor. The goal of this was to show Christians that their bishops and their priests were hypocrites, that they would pinch a little incense and burn incense before the image of the emperor so that they would become free once again. But to the further surprise of Diocletian, guess what the Catholic bishops and priests did? They refused. They would not offer sacrifice to the gods. Eusebius does record that there were a few priests and deacons and maybe some bishops who did compromise and who did abandon Christ. But the great majority of the clergy stayed true, continued to suffer in prison, continued to proclaim the gospel from their bonds. So finally, Diocletian issues his fourth edict. This happened in January or February of 304. This is where it gets really bad. He says, okay, I've had enough. All Christians, every child, every layman, every priest, every deacon, every bishop, every lector, everybody is required to offer sacrifice, deny Christ, or receive death. It's a universal condemnation of Christianity, even children. It began to be implemented throughout the Roman Empire in March and April of 304, and this is when the great number of martyrdoms were received by Christ. It was after this fourth edict. It's impossible to calculate the number of the martyrdoms at this time. The Liber Pontificalis says in one place that in the space of just 1 month, 17,000 Christians were killed for the sake of Christ in just 30 days. Skeptics, modern day historians, look back on it and they say there was probably, they think only like 3,000 or 4,000 martyrs. It's still a lot, but the numbers are much, much higher. In the next several lessons here at the New St. Thomas Institute, we're going to explore a few of those martyrs. We're going to look at St. George, and we're going to look at the account of his martyrdom. We're also going to look at this interesting tradition of the dragon, and we're going to see how an icon, that dragon, can stand for Diocletian. We're also going to look at St. Agnes in Rome, who's one of the most beautiful early teenage martyrs for her chastity, for her virginity. And we're also going to look at St. Sebastian, a patron of sports. He's called the twice martyred because he, in a sense, was martyred 2 times, not just one. So the next few lessons in the New St. Thomas Institute are going to be about the saints and about martyrdom during this time period under the evil emperor Diocletian. Till next time, God bless you. Thanks for being a member of the New St. Thomas Institute, and we'll see you then. Bye.